The COVID-19 pandemic has created a lot of challenges for all of us, and one of them has made the headlines recently is personal privacy. The government would like to keep track of where we are going to ensure that they can trace those who come into contact with the virus. Should we trust government tracing apps? Sharon Polsky has some thoughts on this. She's the president of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada and joins me now via Skype from Calgary. Sharon, welcome back to BCN.
It's always a pleasure.
Provincial governments are now encouraging us to download contact tracing apps. What information does this app collect exactly, and who has control over it?
Well, that's a terrific question because different jurisdictions are putting in different apps. Some places the app is developed by or on behalf of a government, and the government keeps all the information for convenience. And truly, these apps can make a difference. They can help the people who do the contact tracing. They're only meant to supplement the human effort, though, not supplant it. The one that Alberta introduced at the beginning of May, with all the assurances that it is voluntary, and that's good. The information that they need only is your phone number, and the phone will then monitor and keep track of what other phones it is close to, if those other phones have the app downloaded, of course. And they need something like upwards of 80% of smartphone users across the province to download this app and use it, or it's not going to be effective. I've been tracking in the first few days, there was over 30,000 people on average a day. We're dwindling. The numbers now are down to about 4,000 a day. So it's going to take a very, very long time to get the uptake they need, or it'll change, as has happened in other countries, where it will suddenly be made mandatory that you must have this sort of thing. And people are likening that to the electronic ankle bracelets that people on parole sometimes have to wear. In a free and democratic society, it's an outrage, but it's being shoved on us, really. It is being brought in as a foregone conclusion in jurisdictions around the world to keep people healthy.
Now, the government stated that third-party trackers would not be on the app, but experts, however, looking into it saying, in fact, both Microsoft and Google do have trackers on the app. Your thoughts?
They absolutely do. And the Android version of the Alberta app requires that you give permission for the location setting to be on, because the Alberta government says they don't need it, but they say that it's because the Google Bluetooth feature needs it. Other places, it is required. It's such a puzzle, a patchwork quilt of requirements. The very same app that Alberta has, you have to be close to someone for 15 minutes in the last 24 hours. It was built on the model created by Singapore. There you have to be close to someone for 30 minutes. What is it? We have a stronger virus here? I don't know. It keeps going, though, and it's not just the government that's tracking. It is so many technology companies that are actually marketing and location tracking companies that are rebranding and selling their technology as a contact tracer for COVID. And we're having these things being introduced in retail, in airlines. Apple just announced that they're going to be reopening their stores, and that's wonderful. But if you want to enter an Apple retail store, you will have to submit to having your temperature taken with one of these contactless temperature monitors that have been demonstrated to be remarkably inaccurate. You want to take a flight, WestJet and Air Canada, the same thing. In Washington State, if you want to go to a restaurant, the state has now introduced new rules that every customer, including those presumably who go in to pick up an order, the restaurant has to keep their name, their phone number, their email address, and their address for contact tracing.
Did Alberta's Privacy Commissioner officially give the okay to this tracing app yet? And would it make a difference either way?
Well, that's a good problem for the legislators to take care of finally, because the law says that when it comes to health information, if a new program or service or app is going to be brought in, the organization, in this case the government, has to do a privacy impact assessment and submit it to the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Alberta. They did that. The law does not require that they wait until the commissioner has reviewed it or given any suggestions or recommendations. And even if she does give recommendations, the law does not require the organization to do anything with those recommendations. So the government did what it had to. It did a privacy impact assessment.
Now, you chatted with government officials and you asked if employers are expected to use Alberta Trace Together, AB Trace Together, to monitor employees' proximity to one another or track customers, suppliers, and others who enter their premises. What did they have to say?
I'm still waiting to hear back from them. It would be very, very interesting. And again, it's a problem because employers have an obligation to provide a safe workplace, and they can impose certain requirements on their employees. So is someone going to say, I'm not comfortable with my employer taking my medical information and distributing it to who? Now, when it comes to the AB Trace Together app, the website assures us that the information collected by the app, when we choose to share it with the government, it will only be used for contact tracing in relation to COVID, and that's terrific, but it also says it's under certain provisions of legislation. And when you look at those provisions, it's very clear that the Alberta government is allowed, under law, to share that information with other governments, nationally, internationally, with the police. There's a particular order now that if you cough or sneeze at a member of law enforcement, that information can and will be shared.
Now, another thing we've seen with the pandemic is governments giving themselves more power to better protect public health. However, you point out that governments have been extra slow to respond to access to information requests, even denying them entirely. That does not help with accountability and freedom of the press.
Well, you're absolutely right. Freedom of information is about the only way the Canadians and people in any country have to hold their government, their elected representatives, to account, to know what decisions are made, how they are made, how tax dollars are spent. Alberta has extended the period for responding to access requests. Other jurisdictions, other independent agencies of the federal government have basically said, don't bother sending in a request because we're going to ignore it because it's hard now. We can't do it. New Zealand, on the other hand, the other day, it was wonderful news to see that they had proactively released a bunch of information on how their cabinet, how their parliament made decisions about the COVID response. Canada, the cabinet confidences, as they're referred to, are not disclosed. New Zealand, the light is shining on them today in a different way because within 24 hours, they passed a new omnibus bill for public health and safety that allows police to enter homes and businesses without a warrant. And it is sweeping powers. Now, the problem is we are now living in an age of political monkey see, monkey do. If it's good enough for one jurisdiction, other jurisdictions adopt it. So people have to start realizing what the dangers are to our privacy, to our civil liberties, to our charter protected freedoms, and start speaking out.
Now, some companies are talking about continuing the work from home business model even after the pandemic is over. But they're also talking about using tracing apps to keep track of the work that's being done at home. Does this open up the door for business to access personal information?
Well, I'm speaking to you from my office. There's personal information in the background. It's a big challenge now. It's a competition to identify what are the books on someone's shelf now that everybody is doing their interviews from home, and that's fine. But when it comes to an employment situation, yes, you're absolutely right. Not only are employers using technology that monitors their conversations, whether it's by text or on Teams or any other facility, to determine their emotions, whether they're talking about things that are, whether it's bullying or unacceptable language or foul language. All of that is already being monitored. Now, because people are working at home, there's other technologies that are being foisted on employees that takes an image of your screen every so often, every few seconds or minutes, whatever the employer sets. And it sends those pictures back to the boss to keep an eye on whether you're actually at the computer. And if you have a little screen open to monitor whether it's the video of your children in the other room or anything else, your employer now has access to that. Is it any of their business?
Now, during this pandemic, more people than ever have been using social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok. Most of us have no idea what kind of personal information a lot of the platforms are collecting from us. Sharon, how can we really protect ourselves and our families?
Well, it's not just those. If you look at the privacy policies of some of these so-called contact tracing apps, they're very clear that they will not only collect the information that you provide, but they will collect information about you from other sources, including whether it's social media or whatever other platform, public information that they can get their hands on and create profiles about you. How do we protect ourselves? We read the privacy policies, we start questioning, we stop putting all the minutiae of our lives online. Go into the settings, block the privacy setting, set the privacy requirements so it blocks as much as possible. Be very, very judicious in what information you choose to reveal to other people, even the ones you trust, because the internet is not fallible, it is not infallible rather, and breaches happen. And even with the best of intentions, sometimes you give your information to someone else, something happens, and through no fault of your own, your information is out there for other people to use and use against you.
Do you think it's entirely possible that we could see governments use the pandemic as an excuse to continue certain restrictions and surveillance practices to exercise even more control over the public?
I think we've already seen that. Certainly after 9/11, it was a horrible, tragic event that changed the world. Well, at the beginning of March of 2020, there was another event. It was the WHO declaring a global pandemic. And after 9/11, the Patriot Act came in as a temporary measure to guard against terrorism. Now we have all sorts of other measures being put in place that are also being called temporary, and a great many of them can be renewed temporarily and temporarily. And all we have to do is look back in our own history. The Temporary Income Tax Act from 1917 is still with us temporarily.
Sharon, how can we really protect our children from sexual predators who are at home right now? They're visiting a lot of these websites and going after our kids.
We have to have the conversations with our children and not to try and scare them. It's very easy to say, put it in personal terms. When I was a kid, I could go out and play in the street. It wasn't a problem. Everybody in the neighborhood knew me and I knew them. But when it's online and it's a picture, you don't know whose picture it really is, and they can say what they want. It's easy to fool you. You know who grandma is because you've met grandma. If it's someone else, you don't know who it is. So we've got to have these conversations to educate the children. And you know what? Before we educate our children, a lot of adults have to educate themselves too.
And how about monitoring our kids' online behaviors? Although some children may not agree with that.
It's, as the government is doing with us, it's for our own protection. The bigger challenge I find in all of this is the education tech sector, where because kids are going to school now online, there's so many tech companies that have given their technology to school boards and said, here, use this. You'll be able to be in touch with your students. You'll be able to monitor if little Susie or little Johnny is actually doing their homework. You'll be able to monitor what they're saying on their text and their messaging that has nothing to do with school. But they're infiltrating people's personal lives. There is pushback in some areas, whether it's wonderful to see. Near Washington, D.C., there's a school where most of the student population is the children of CIA agents and government agents. They were able to negotiate that none of the technology used in school will follow anything about the children. Others who don't have the same clout, their kids are subject to all of this, and the school boards are a problem because whoever's doing the procurement there, if they don't understand the privacy implications, they're left at the mercy of whatever the vendor says, as look at all these wonderful benefits, the cost saving, it's great, we have all the security. And then that is imposed on the parents. And what choice do they have? They have to consent so that their children can actually follow the lessons. It's coercive. Parents need to educate themselves and speak up and push back against the school boards, against the government, against so many organizations that are imposing these things on us for our own good.
Now, bottom line is we have to protect our families. Sharon Polsky, President of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada, thanks so much for your insight once again today.
Thank you for your interest. This is important.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.